Dorothea Hurley has never given a tell-all interview about her marriage. What follows is built from what's actually on the public record. Jon Bon Jovi's own words in interviews, court documents, and reporting from outlets like ABC News, the Associated Press, and People. Where the record is silent, this script says so instead of inventing quotes that were never said. She's been married to one of the most famous men in rock music for over 3 decades, and in that time, Dorothea Hurley has given almost no interviews about her marriage. Not one tell-all. Not one tearful sit-down. While Jon Bon Jovi built an entire career on being watched, his wife built a life on not being watched at all. That silence isn't nothing. It's a choice, repeated for 35 years. And in 2024, when Jon Bon Jovi finally broke his own silence about infidelity during their marriage, it wasn't Dorothea who spoke. It was him. She still hasn't said a public word about it. That gap between what he's revealed and what she's never confirmed, denied, or explained, is the real story here. Long before arena tours and platinum records, Jon Bon Jovi and Dorothea Hurley were 2 teenagers at Sayreville War Memorial High School in New Jersey. The story of how they met has been repeated so often it's become part of Bon Jovi lore. During a class test, a young Jon Bon Jovi leaned over and copied answers off the girl sitting next to him. That girl was Dorothea. At the time, nothing romantic happened between them. Dorothea was dating a friend of Jon's, and the 2 teenagers simply became close friends, the kind of friendship built on shared classes and small-town familiarity rather than anything more. It would take years, and a fair amount of growing up, before that friendship turned into something else. Dorothea's own identity was forming well before she was ever linked to a famous name. She started training in karate as a teenager, and by the time she was in her 20s, she'd built a genuine competitive record, earning recognition as one of the top-ranked green belt competitors in the country before going on to earn a 4th-degree black belt. She became a karate instructor in New Jersey, a role she kept for years, even as the man she'd eventually marry became one of the biggest rock stars in the world. It's a detail that tends to get flattened in tabloid retellings, but it matters. Dorothea Hurley had a discipline and a career of her own before Jon Bon Jovi's wife became the label most people knew her by. Bon Jovi, the band, formed in 1983, and the momentum that followed was fast and disorienting. Local New Jersey gigs turned into national tours within a couple of years, and the ordinary life Jon and Dorothea had known in high school became harder and harder to hold on to. By the mid-1980s, the distance had done real damage. Jon Bon Jovi and Dorothea Hurley split up, not with a public blow-up, but the way a lot of young relationships end when one person's world expands faster than the other can keep pace with. During that period apart, Jon was linked to actress Diane Lane, a relationship that played out with far more public attention than anything he'd had with Dorothea. It didn't last, but it was a very different kind of relationship from the one he'd left behind in New Jersey. One lived partly in gossip columns instead of high school hallways. That stretch of separation ended up being a turning point rather than a permanent split. By the end of the decade, Jon and Dorothea had found their way back to each other. In April 1989, during a break on the New Jersey Syndicate tour, the band passed through Los Angeles. Rather than plan a wedding, Jon and Dorothea drove out to the Graceland Wedding Chapel in Las Vegas and got married on the spot. No family, no rehearsal, no advance notice to anyone in Jon's circle. The backlash from his camp was immediate. Bandmates and management were reportedly caught completely off guard, and Jon has said in later interviews that there was real tension over the decision, particularly by some accounts, with bandmate Richie Sambora, who felt blindsided by how the news broke. Jon has since said, in essence, that the decision was made for the 2 of them and nobody else, regardless of how it landed with the band or the label. They've now been married for well over 3.5 decades, a fact Jon Bon Jovi has marked publicly more than once, including in a 2024 interview around their wedding anniversary. Marriage didn't slow the touring schedule down, and for years, the day-to-day work of running a household and raising children fell disproportionately on Dorothea. Jon has openly admitted, in multiple interviews over the years, to missing birthdays and ordinary family milestones while on the road, the kind of admission that's easy to make decades later and much harder to live through in real time. What kept things functioning wasn't some perfectly even split of responsibilities. It was closer to an agreement, unspoken or otherwise, that the arrangement would be lopsided and that both of them would live with it. Dorothea also kept her own income and career going through much of this, first through karate instruction, later through restaurant and philanthropic work, which meant the marriage never depended on a single earner the way a lot of celebrity marriages do. For years, rumors about infidelity followed Jon Bon Jovi the way they follow most rock stars of his era. But in April 2024, while promoting his Hulu documentary Thank You, Good Night, The Bon Jovi Story, he addressed it directly, on the record, on camera, in an ABC primetime special hosted by Michael Strahan called Halfway There. "I got away with murder," Bon Jovi told Strahan. "I'm a rock and roll star. I'm not a saint. I'm not saying that there weren't 100 girls in my life. I'm Jon Bon Jovi. It was pretty good." He added that he was never going to let it threaten what he'd actually built with Dorothea, telling Strahan he wasn't going to jeopardize his marriage for the sake of what he called the narcissist in him. Around the same time, in an interview with The Independent, he put it more bluntly. It was about never pretending to have been a saint, but also never being foolish enough to wreck his home life over it. The reaction was immediate and, in a lot of corners of the internet, harsh. Commentators questioned how a marriage survives that kind of admission playing out on national television. Notably, Dorothea was reportedly absent from a New York screening of the documentary that same month, just over a week after she'd appeared alongside Jon at the film's UK premiere, an absence outlets like Page 6 connected to the timing of his comments, though neither Jon nor Dorothea has ever confirmed that link publicly. What's worth sitting with is what Jon said about her role in holding things together despite it all. "There was no doubt in my mind that this world revolves because of her," he told Strahan, crediting her with keeping both the kids and him right over the years. That's the core tension in this story. Jon chose, on his own terms, decades after the fact, to make this part of their marriage public. Dorothea did not choose that. She's never confirmed the details, never disputed them, and never sat down for her own version of that interview. Whatever she actually thought or felt when those headlines broke is something only she and Jon know, and turning that silence into a script of what she really thinks would be fiction, not reporting. Not every hard chapter in this marriage involved fame or infidelity. In November 2012, their oldest child, 19-year-old Stephanie Bon Jovi, then a freshman at Hamilton College in upstate New York, was found unresponsive in her dorm after an apparent heroin overdose. Police recovered heroin, marijuana, and drug paraphernalia in the room, and Stephanie was initially charged with several misdemeanor drug offenses. Those charges were dropped within days. New York's Good Samaritan law, passed in 2011 specifically to encourage people to call for help during an overdose without fear of prosecution, meant the Oneida County District Attorney dismissed the case against both Stephanie and a second student who'd been charged alongside her. Jon Bon Jovi later described the phone call about his daughter as one of the worst moments of his life as a parent, though neither he nor Dorothea used the incident to launch any kind of public campaign. Stephanie recovered and has largely stayed out of the public eye ever since, a pattern that holds for how this family has generally handled its hardest moments, privately, without turning crisis into content. In the years since, Jon and Dorothea have put real, sustained effort into philanthropic work together. Through the JBJ Soul Foundation and the JBJ Soul Kitchen, a community restaurant model where guests pay what they can afford or volunteer time instead, Dorothea has taken on a hands-on role well beyond simply lending her name to a cause. Reporting on her describes her as directly involved in day-to-day operations rather than treating the work as a distant charitable gesture. It's the kind of project that doesn't generate tabloid headlines, which may be exactly why it says more about the actual marriage than the headlines do. Two people who met copying test answers in a New Jersey classroom ended up spending a chunk of their adult lives building restaurants that feed people who can't afford to pay. In April 2024, days after the infidelity story broke, Jon Bon Jovi walked a red carpet alone ahead of a documentary screening, and speculation about the marriage exploded online. The explanation, when it surfaced, was far less dramatic than the rumors. Dorothea had reportedly tested positive for COVID-19 and stayed home to avoid exposing other guests. The two of them had appeared together at an earlier premiere for the same film just days before, which undercuts the idea that her absence signaled some sudden rift. It's a small example of a pattern that's followed this couple for years. Because so little about their actual private life is confirmed, absences, silences, and ordinary explanations get filled in with speculation. A missed red carpet becomes a marriage in crisis story. An interview clip becomes a referendum on whether the whole relationship is a lie. None of that speculation has ever come from Dorothea herself. 35 plus years in, the honest version of this story isn't a wife finally reveals all moment, because that moment hasn't happened, and there's no verified evidence it's coming. What's actually on the record is narrower and, in some ways, more interesting. A husband who's chosen, on his own terms, to admit to infidelity on national television. A wife who has never once used the same platform to respond. A family that handled a genuine medical crisis with their daughter almost entirely out of public view. And 3 decades of philanthropic work that neither of them treated as a headline opportunity. Dorothea Hurley's silence isn't a mystery to be solved. It's the same choice she's apparently made since she was a teenager, watching a friend's small local gigs turn into arena tours, to keep her own life and her own voice on her own terms. What part of the real story surprised you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments.